it's a great pleasure to have with us Erik Asphaug, a giant of planetary science, or a great expert in giant impacts. And in particular, he had some really reference papers about forming the moon. So, can you describe what you did at that time, and is it still true how we formed the moon?
Well, you know, we never know 100% whether our theories are true, unfortunately. I think it's incontrovertible that it formed in some kind of a giant impact. We don't know exactly what kind. And so a lot of what's happened in the last 10 years, 20 years has been to try to figure out really the geometry, the different kinds of bodies, whether it was unique in the solar system or whether it was more common than we
Initially, there were various theories like a capture or something that was detached out of the Earth, and then, okay, you came up with this really calculation of how a body, at that time it was the size of Mars, would have impacted the young Earth. But so now, okay, how big was this impact?
Well, it has to be, I think that was the significant change, was this understanding that planets themselves can collide. People danced around the edges of this because they wanted to make the moon, of course. It's unique in the solar system. It's the biggest of the moons in the inner solar system. It's the only big moon in the inner solar system. And people tried, like, can we capture something? Well, how do you slow it down? Can you spin off a piece of the Earth? Well, how do you spin the Earth up so fast? And it turns out the giant impact kind of combines all these theories into one. It's like by having them collide, you spin them up, you slow down the thing to capture it. It has all these elements that explains the moon very well, except for one thing. Its composition is a little bit strange because the moon is very, very similar to the Earth in detailed composition. Like if you took a random rock from the moon and you didn't know anything else and you analyzed it in the chemical laboratory, you might say, well, it's a kind of a strange rock, it's a volcanic rock, but you wouldn't be able to say it's not from Earth. And so this giant impact theory that people are pretty much, I'd say 100% behind that something like this happened, it has a hard time explaining why it's so like the Earth. So I think we have this sort of like a, almost a romantic relationship with the
a one-night stand.
One-night stand,
But how much do we retain the composition of the impactor and of the young Earth, or was there some exchange of
of course. This is the big puzzle now, is how do you get the details of the mixing during the collision, or our latest theory is that it was two bodies that collided once, didn't stick. And then they orbit the sun again for maybe 100,000 years or so, and then they come back again and they collide, and then they do
second date.
Second date. Yeah, no, it's very much more legit, you know.
Okay, they come. Yeah. And okay, but what happened to the Earth then? Was it a profound effect? I mean, it was quite a big impact. Did that change the evolution of the Earth itself?
I think it's sort of, you could say that was day one of the Earth. Prior to that was an Earth that was maybe 90% of its mass, compositionally very different, rotating very different, may have had an atmosphere, an ocean, may have been bone dry. We don't really know. And then when the moon hit, global melting of the whole planet, and so you sort of start all over.
Yeah, but for instance, some people say that this event may have been so violent that eventually it has affected also the internal evolution of the Earth, maybe the way it developed, sustained volcanism, or maybe even later plate tectonics. So how that?
There have been some talks at this meeting about so we call the Mars-sized planet that comes and hits the Earth. Now it's given a name, Theia, from mythology, the daughter of Selene, the moon, and so Theia, think of a planet the mass of Mars. And think of this collision different from typical collisions you think of where something hits and usually the bullet goes away. Here it's an accretion. The bullet kind of hits and becomes part of the Earth. it's maybe a grapefruit versus an orange kind of in size, relative sizes, and it becomes part of the Earth. Its core goes to the core of the Earth. Its rock becomes part of the rock of the Earth, and so it's actually down inside. And so that sort of was, if that was day zero of the Earth, then the Earth started with another planet, inside of it. Mm-hmm. And that could be the beginning of a lot of the geology of the Earth that makes it so unique.
Okay, so you have worked on the moon, but some of your work is also applicable to other bodies. So do you impact other bodies?
Oh,
so
yeah.
What other project have you been working on?
Well, I got into moon formation because I studied asteroid collisions. I thought asteroids were very interesting. I was always very theoretical. I just thought it was fascinating. And so it took a while before I sort of grew up to model bigger impacts, but I started working on asteroids, which are, for me, fascinating. And then now they're very important because of, the understanding of the asteroid hazard and can we deflect the asteroids. I'm very passionately interested in the future of asteroid resource potential and mining, and how can you get a lot of the mining activity off of the Earth into space. And then you deal with these issues that asteroids have, very low gravity. If we were sitting on an asteroid and I had you on the back, you'd go floating. It could be very fun floating around on an asteroid. But you can't just take a shovel of asteroid dirt and put it into a bucket. You have to think very, almost like an astrophysicist about doing simple operations on a body that small.
And so you do some numerical simulation with spatial codes where you have a mixture of fluids and particles and so on. But do you validate also what you do with laboratory experiments?
Well, the funny thing about asteroids is that you can simulate a lot of things in the laboratory, weak strength, but one thing you can't really simulate for long periods of time is weak gravity. When you think about it, like for instance, you're coming down in an elevator very fast, you have a little bit less gravity. And so you can imagine having an experiment in an elevator that drops very fast and becomes low gravity, and we have these kinds of facilities in Europe most famously. And but that only lasts until you hit the ground, so 10 seconds, a few seconds. Whereas the physics that you want to explore take place for hours, and that doesn't really exist on Earth. You go into space and there's, like on the space station, there's zero gravity. And that's not right either. And so we're left, we still have to figure out how to have a laboratory experiment. And so we're thinking about this with space centrifuges, actually, where you have a very low speed centrifuge, about 1 revolution per minute, and that would create an asteroid-like gravity. And then you could maybe imagine throwing marbles and seeing what happens.
So a lot of fun, a lot of science, but the public will come and say, why do we care? Why does it affect about humanity, about our future?
I think that's a great question. I ask people what our space programs should be doing, and usually, almost always, they say, finding out if we're alone in the universe. And so, why do we care, like you say, about the moon? But I think that there's, so here we are humans on the one planet that has a big moon. I think that maybe not coincidence that life evolved on a planet that had this double planet relationship that has a lot of things going for it in terms of sort of the stability of the Earth's rotation, so we don't just flip our North Pole with our South Pole. It has, tides, so the water rises, the water falls. And so I think if you start to look at planet formation in terms of the study of the moon, you might find these very important connections. Also, I like to think of diversity, because if every planet was born the same, maybe there'd be no life in the whole universe. Everything would look like a gas ball or a dry rock. But instead, this process of collisions, when you think about it, oranges hitting grapefruits or grapefruits hitting basketballs or at different angles, we find out in our numerical simulations that these are completely different outcomes for every kind of impact. And so I think it's like a recipe for putting the same material into the oven and coming out with something completely different every time. And then one of those times, it's good for life.
Okay, so that to understand our origins and also if there is some habitable world elsewhere.
Yes.
But about business, because we have some audience interested in business. So from what you do, is there something that provide information for business people that want to invest in asteroids or planetary resources?
Well, I have gone to enough conferences on asteroid resources to talk to a lot of the people who work in mining on the Earth, for example. And I asked the question, how long does it take for the investment in the land and the development and buying the rights to until you get your first dollar? And it's usually 40 to 50 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this is the time scale we live in space mission from beginning to end of very large projects, the very largest projects. And so I think from a business point of view, we already have the model for thinking in terms of return on investment. I just don't think everyone quite has the imagination yet. And maybe through advances in space, we start to build that imagination.
Mm-hmm. But now, for instance, with the moon, we could accelerate because there is quite a big focus of using resources in situ, at least, not so much returning, but you could develop some both technology, but also some collaboration that after you can expand to deep space.
I think you don't know where it all is heading, but I think when you think of the moon, it's not that far away. It's like 10 times farther than flying to Australia. It's not really that, or maybe it's 60 times farther.
Yeah, we come from Hawaii.
It's like do that
just,
a little bit farther.
Last week we were on a volcano in Hawaii, making a simulation like we would be on the moon. So yes.
I think that it's like it's another continent of the Earth. It's a piece of the Earth. It's I think we need to think about the economics of lunar exploration, not just in terms of metals or water or helium-3 for fusion reaction, but I think we need to think about it also as like a place that people would set a high price upon visiting. And so for that reason, I'm passionately invested in the concept of preserving like the lunar viewshed. Like we want to be able to land on the moon and see the moon the way the Apollo astronauts saw the moon. And so this doesn't mean you don't go back and do things, but it means you sort of think, forward thinking about where to localize resource development, as you build the capability to go on to the next place, which I think is probably Mars. Although, 100 years go by, well, you look 100 years in the past and we were barely flying airplanes. So, but
also I think that one of the most precious of resources you could find on the moon is human creativity. How you use your creativity for science, for technology, also working together peacefully, because there you cannot have war. And also developing some common conscience of protecting environment for the future generation.
I think
that could be a good resource to exploit.
That's a beautiful sentiment, because I think peace is worth more money than almost anything. And I think when you look at the Apollo program, and you look historically at where we were before Apollo and where we were after Apollo, and not just Apollo, but the whole space race and the Cold War, you went from, not to get too political, but you went from the Cuban Missile Crisis, where, we almost had nuclear hydrogen bombs going off, to only 8 or 10 years later, you had a handshake between Apollo and Russian astronauts in space, sharing each other's launch facility, this intimate connection. And I do believe space is the place to for the human future in the way that you said.
Very well said. So space, the pillar, science, technology, we are going to have new business, but also a place for peace, also for exploration and for a new space renaissance beyond the Earth.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Erik.
Yeah, yeah.